Hello. Welcome to LBMC's Cybersecurity Sense podcast. I'm Mark Burnette, your host, and I'm excited to be here today because this is a special episode for LBMC. My guest, Greg Schaffer, believe it or not, is the first external guest we've hosted on this podcast in the many years that we've had this podcast. And I can't think of a better person to have on this podcast than Greg, who has been a friend, a colleague, a client, and someone that I have enjoyed collaborating with through many years. Greg is the host of the Virtual CISO Moment podcast and also does a lot of work in the cybersecurity profession. So, Greg, welcome.
Thanks, Mark. I'm so privileged and honored to be the first external guest here. I didn't realize that until we started here. I think you'd mentioned it in previous communication. It just didn't sink in. So thank you.
Well, Greg, I couldn't think of anybody better to have. And I've been really looking forward to this discussion. I know you have had me on your podcast a couple times, and I've always enjoyed our conversations. And one of the things I thought we could start with today, Greg, is because you speak to cybersecurity leaders all over the country in your podcast, I'm curious, based on those conversations, what cyber topics are top of mind right now? When you're having these conversations with these leaders, tell us what you guys are talking about. What do they want to talk about?
Well, it's kind of interesting that it can end up being all over the spectrum as far as the threat environment out there, because that's one of the questions I like to ask is so what is your take on the threat primarily to small and mid-sized businesses for from an information security perspective? And a lot of the answers are what you would think would be the answers, the stock answers, or ransomware being one, business email compromise, that sort of stuff. But more so, what I'm seeing, and I think that this is a very good sign for our industry, is more so people are not talking so much about specific threats or specific technologies or anything. They're talking more from a business perspective. So what I mean by that is yeah, they're talking about loss of continuity for operations, or they're talking about um, really just understanding how the threat environment really applies to the particular business, and asking questions like that, asking simple questions like, "What do we not know?" and "What's the culture in the business?" So, what this means to me is that, and I have leaders on, but I would say that everybody I have on is a leader of some sort, but not necessarily in the org chart. All of them, though, are seemingly more wanting to understand that this isn't a technology issue, this is a business issue. And I know you and we've talked about this many, many times in the past, and it's nice to see that sort of view being more popular amongst practitioners.
Oh, that's great. And so it sounds like to me from what you're saying is you are seeing a shift from talking about tactics to talking more strategy.
Yes.
And you talked about one of the references you used, I would say, is the security triad, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability, thinking at a high level about macro issues related to the business rather than in the tactic level about micro issues that are specific controls that we deploy in the profession to try to address those kind of macro business goals.
Correct, because if you think about it, the addressing the controls aspect really ends up being like the proverbial whack-a-mole type thing, because there's always going to be some new threat or some new control or some new this. It's a wash, rinse, and repeat. It's the same thing. And so, but the threat to the business is the constant among them all. So if we talk specifically about ransomware or BC or other, which I don't want to minimize that. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But we're not really reaching the heart of the issue. The heart of the issue is, remember, information security exists to keep the business going. It's not like a business is in business just to have a cool place to do threat hunting or something like that. So it's all about the business when all is said and done.
Well, you're exactly right. And, I say all the time that as a security leader, our job is to advise and educate the business executive team about key cyber risks facing the company and then help them make well informed decisions. And they may make a decision to accept a risk that makes the security leader a little uncomfortable. But if we feel like we've educated them properly, then we have to accept the fact that there may be other business considerations that have gone into their thinking that have led them to say, you know what, we're not going to spend that additional money or deploy that additional technology or whatever it may be to address the control, because there are macro factors in play for our business that we need to consider.
And absolutely, and that's something that we don't, as even as the CISO in an organization, we may not know all of those other factors, nor should we have the need to know. My one of my mantras is simply stating that the CISO, or in my practitioner space, the virtual CISO, that our primary role is to provide the C-suite and the board of directors with enough information about the threat environment so that they can make risk-informed decisions. They make
Yeah.
the decisions, they take on the risk, and if they say no to something and they don't explain it, it's okay to accept it. Sometimes that's hard for us because sometimes we're like, no, you have to do this. You have to do this. You don't understand. No, that's okay. But you got to make sure, though, that you're very good at what you're doing in or in counseling the business leaders on that risk. That's your main goal right there.
That's a really good point, Greg. And when I was a CISO, I remember the times that I would leave the conversations with my fellow executive team, and they had not chosen the outcome that I was thinking they would choose, or my recommendation. My first thought was, did I communicate it well? And if I did, then okay, cool, I can accept that and move on. If I didn't communicate it well, that's on me, and I need to think about my messaging, and I need to make sure I'm putting it in the right business context, because ultimately that's what they're thinking. They don't want us to talk pings, packets, ports, firewalls, all that stuff. They want things put in the business context so that they can factor that into all of the other business risks that they've got to address.
Now, I add one thing to that too. So communicate and document.
Ah, yes.
So
Okay, good point.
because I mean, there have been times when the CISO has been called on to the carpet for like, well, you said A and you said B, whatever. I always advise folks that to just document your decisions, document the board's decisions. That's not just for the CYA. It's just good for business practices so that you can reference it later. Because when you accept a risk, that's probably something that you would want to go back to and review on a periodic basis, annually, maybe quarterly, with board meetings, just based on the environment. So communication, documentation.
Yeah, and I've seen, to that point, I've seen a lot of times where after a conversation, as I've advised my clients similarly to write it down and send it back to the leadership team. Here's what I heard you say, and I want to make sure we're clear. When they see it in writing, all of a sudden they get a little uncomfortable seeing in writing, and all of a sudden, oh, you know what? Let's revisit that conversation one more time. So
You
it's a great
you
point.
you are agreeing to accept this risk. Oh, wait a minute, did I really say that? Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure we really wanted to say that. That's right. Well, Greg, kind of on this same topic, because you do advise organizations as a virtual CISO, I'm curious from your perspective, what are a couple of the cyber disciplines that you're finding are most difficult for organizations to master?
So I always like to start out, first of all, by explaining the three lines of defense. First line being operational management, second line being risk management, third line being audit. And from there, that really kind of accelerates the business's understanding the different disciplines within cybersecurity and information security. And I consider cyber the technical arm of InfoSec. But the more important thing is to make sure that when you're in a conversation with someone, that they all understand the nomenclature. So it could very well be that somebody else considers InfoSec a sub of cybersecurity. It's just kind of a nuanced um, uh, industry that we're in. And sometimes that alone gets to be one of the more things for organizations to master. So what are you really talking about? This gets back to your communication thing. Now, specifically within the domains, it seems like that the more technical you get, the more that you start to have the glassy-eyed stuff. And this is an important thing to understand because when you're communicating with the businesses, unless you're communicating directly with the technical sides where you can talk ports and packets and all that really fun stuff that we don't get to play around with as much as we'd like to anymore.
Yeah.
Um, the same thing with databases or with encryption or API integration. There's a few things there that just because of where I have been in the industry, the things that have come more technical later in my career, I'm not all that great with as well too. I think that though I would distill it down to um, the organizations aren't going to master any of them. They're looking at folks to advise them again on the risk of. But if they can master the understanding of how it implicates the business, um, now, networking is pretty easy. It's like, okay, I can't get to it. It must be a network problem. Okay, I understand that. But when you start talking about like different areas of encryption, is it encrypted at the disk or at the database, or our API is got some vulnerabilities with it? Then you start to have the glassy eyes, deer in the headlight look. So I think that there's no one correct answer if you want to go specific with that, just because. Um, I mean, some of the other areas of information security, I think it's easier for them to understand, like risk management, because running a business is about managing risk and different types of risk, and one of those being like vendor risk. They can wrap their head around that pretty well too. It's like, although sometimes it's like they think that, hey, if a organization has a SOC 2 report, all we have to do is make sure that we get it and just throw it in the pile and they're good. It's like, no, you got to at least read that stuff. So you understand what it is that you're seeing.
Well, I think, Greg, one of the key takeaways from what you just shared is as cybersecurity professionals, we need to be thinking about it's important for us to make sure that we are doing a good job of helping those who aren't in our profession understand some of those uniquenesses. And I'm not saying we have to explain the details of encryption or something like that, but the bottom line is, if it's difficult for an organization to master, at some point they may get frustrated, they may redirect resources or those types of things. And so I think we just have to continue championing for the things that are important in the overall risk management program. Addressing the highest risk items first, and just kind of knock them off one at a time.
Yeah. No, I would agree.
Yep. Well, you made a reference in your comments. You said earlier in my career, and I happen to know a little bit about your career, Greg. And so I know that partway through your career in the information technology space, you transitioned into full time cybersecurity. And so I'm curious, as someone who kind of been hovering around the space, but now immersed yourself in the space for at least, heck, the last, what is it, 20 years or so it seems now, but quite a while. What is unique about this profession from what you expected, and what have you learned that you didn't realize before joining the information security profession?
So I don't know if I'd use the word transitioned. I like to say that I was dragged in kicking and screaming. And the rationale behind that is that I was all part of networking was my forte. Big in networking, network engineering, network management, and all that. And of course, firewalls, they fell underneath networking. So that's how I started to get dragged into it. And it's very interesting about what's maybe unique in what I've learned about the profession, because prior to starting in security, I never wanted to get into security because I saw it, if you'll excuse the kind of pun, I saw it kind of binary. It's like, well, either you're completely protected or you're not protected. And I don't want that responsibility. I remember thinking at one point in time, one of the places I was working, they were laying fiber to another building on this was at a university's campus. And they didn't wanna do the standard of putting it encased in conduit encased in concrete, so, and I'm like, "Well, no, I'm not gonna take responsibility for that. I recommended that you do the 7 times more expensive option." And the CFO of the organization of the university said, "Well, look, there's just no chance they're gonna be digging in that area for the next 30 years," and it's been about 30 years since, and guess what? They have not dug there yet. So what does that all mean? Um, that means about risk management. So when I started to look at security as risk management, then things made a lot more sense. We talked about that a little bit beforehand about understanding that and conveying that to the leadership and all that. Ironically, part of what brought me to this conclusion was when I sat for the CISSP back in, it's been actually almost 20 years ago. It was 2006, I think. Um, and I'm preparing for it, and I'm doing all the domains in the Common Base Knowledge book. I think everybody at the time had the same big book, the gold and
Yeah.
green book from ISC squared. And I was surprised to learn, taking practice tests, that my strength was not in networking. It was actually in risk management. Networking was second. Cryptographic crap was last, and it still is.
It is for most of us, my friend.
But that was the thing that surprised me the most is like, so once I shifted my brain from this binary, either it's connected in networking or it isn't, that sort of thing. Once I shifted my brain and I realized, okay, this is more of an art than a strict science. It's like, oh, I like that because now that that's engaging another part of my brain, and I need to learn more about what the risk is. And then the dominoes fell. Okay, well, now I got to learn more about the business and the why. You ever notice, Mark, that when people understand their why, that they tend to do a task very much better? If you just tell them to do something, but they don't understand why, sometimes it's begrudgingly and all of that. And I always try to emphasize to folks now, whatever their industry is, like, tell your folks, why are they doing this? How does this help the business? Simple thing being like, don't click on an email link. Well, here's the reason why. And you can scroll all down and how it could even affect where you might lose your job, not because you're being punished, but because the business could go out of business or could lose a lot of money. And then the light bulbs go on. And that's such a cool thing to see that.
Yeah. Yeah. Simon Sinek's made a whole career now on understanding your why, right? He did that. He did the TED Talk and wrote a book on it, and it has led to an entire speaking career on that whole concept. But yeah, this
Yeah.
is a really good point. Well, Greg, you are an extremely interesting fellow. And for our listeners who may not know you as well as your listeners do, you obviously they know you're a cybersecurity leader, but they may not know you're a fiction author, you're a fitness enthusiast, you're an entrepreneur. I happen to know this. You wouldn't say it, but you are a philanthropist as well. I know that's your part, and I admire that about you. And so I'm curious. Tell me what motivates you. What kind of what drives Greg? What motivates you every day?
Life is a blessing. Life is a gift. Life is wonderful. Life is full of so many opportunities. And I guess maybe to paraphrase Ferris Bueller, going back almost 40 years now, so I'm dating myself, but it's like sometimes you just got to take a day off and stop and look around and understand. But so for me, it's like all these different experiences. It's like try to jump into something. Um, I was having a conversation with my father a couple of days ago, and I had mentioned to him, it's just like, because I was talking about doing something else, and I said, "Dad, I've realized something. It's like, you know what my main hobby is? My main hobby is having hobbies." So he laughed. He's like, "Yes, over the years, that's definitely correct." But that's my motivation because, yeah, I mean, the time is limited. Or like today, this conversation with you will never pass again, and it's just wonderful to try to live in the here and the now, be present in the moment, and not be afraid. That's one of the things I learned about being, you mentioned entrepreneur, running a small business now for 8 years, and I appreciate your help early on. You've mentored me a little bit through that, and actually a lot of bit in the beginning, and really helped get me on a nice setting for that. Um, and part of what helped is that I was afraid, and I was afraid of the unknown, and yet if you go in with the heart of a servant to anything you do, you've already won because your success is based on how you've served and just your heart and serving. So that's my motivation. My motivation is to learn, to serve, to enjoy this wonderful life that God's given us, and to hopefully make a difference and help others.
Awesome. That's awesome. And you're right. Fear can be a very good motivator, Greg, for those of us that are driven. If there's the kind of the fear of failure can be something that drives us to try to make sure that we don't fail. And I think that's a really good point.
Absolutely, absolutely. Fear is not something to be afraid of. I guess you could say. The only thing to fear is fear itself. Oh, there we go.
Oh, look at you. You're paraphrasing all kinds of stuff now. Well, one of the things that one of your hobbies, I guess, one of your many hobbies I happen to know is running. And you and I've shared some conversations on running. I don't run nearly as often as you do, and typically not as far either. But unless I'm being chased. But when I think about running, a lot of times when I run, my brain starts going, and I can do some good thinking. You may find yourself the same way, and so
That's the
it's
endorphins
definitely.
kicking in. Yes,
I
absolutely.
guess so. Generally, the first thing I'm thinking is, "Why the heck am I doing this? What am I doing with myself? This is terrible." And once I push past that and say, "I'm just going to finish," then I start thinking about the important things of life and all of that. But kind of thinking about running, to me, there's a lot of parallels between running a race and our cybersecurity profession, and it brings to mind for me, Greg, a scripture in Romans 5, verses 3 and 4. It says, "Not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, endurance produces character, and character produces hope." So, obviously the suffering when you were running, and the endurance, and we finish, and there's the hope of the finishing and all that. But to me, there's a lot of parallels between running the race, a physical race, and then running the race of cybersecurity, and continuing to endure, even though we have little battles every day, if you will, with the bad guys, and maybe even intra-organizationally and things like that. And so I don't know, it just brings to mind to me a lot of parallels. I wonder if what your thoughts are on that.
We get so hung up sometimes on the smaller items, and I don't mean smaller in minimizing. I mean smaller in maybe timestamp, if you will, in security. It's like whether it be that we're suffering an incident, a malware incident, or a ransomware incident. Um, or our systems aren't logging properly, and all of that, and I there is an element of suffering with regards to that, because you wanna be able to get in and have everything running the way you want it to. You don't want to you almost take it personally when, something's been, dinged, or or something bad happens, and really, there's nothing that you can do about that no matter how well you prepare. When you run, there's always the chance that you're gonna have an injury. It just happens. Tends to happen as you get more often as you get older, just for those who are wondering. Um, but you always have to keep your focus on, again, what is it I'm trying to do and why? It's like we're trying to secure the organization, as best as possible. We're not going to be perfect all the time. Don't knock ourselves out trying to be perfect, but just try to do the best you can. I'll paraphrase Paul, because I'm not really sure what book verse this is from, but um, I will say it's part of the New Testament, though. Hey, uh, finish well, finish the race strong, and pace yourself along the race, and realize it's just like, just because you have like one little bump along the way, with regards to security, and it could be, I'll take this thought line just a little further. There are a lot of people out there that are having issues trying to find a job in information security, cybersecurity, and looking to give up. But it's hard to tell someone they're not to give up. Look at the long game when they're caught in this process of, our recruiting process in general in our field is broken, and I won't go into that now because that'd be in a whole nother podcast. But it's hard sometimes to look through when you're suffering like that to see the end. But I think you said that suffering produces endurance, endurance produces character, and then at the end you have hope.
Yeah.
And that's true, and it is true in information security. It's just hard. There's an element of faith there, in that it's hard to see that your efforts to secure the organization are going to pay off in the end, but they will. They always do.
Yeah, yeah, and, I think, those of us that have been CISOs, we get the scars on the back, and as you go through the process, because you learn a lot. You make mistakes, you have some successes, you have some partial successes, and along the way, it shapes who we are. Really, all experiences in life shape who we are. And I think about those scars on my back from my time as a CISO as part of the character, if you will, right? Because it did shape how I think about our profession, how I work with my clients these days, and the things that the positions that I take as it relates to risk management and how we think about our profession. So anyway, well, thanks for commenting on that, Greg. I admire your running, and I think to your point about you get injured probably more the older we are. Maybe that's a good reason we shouldn't run. I don't know.
I have cut down somewhat, but I've taken up mountain biking again, though. So it's like, well, and I know this is not video, but I've got like, a little road rash here from kind of hitting a rock on the trails and all that stuff. So, but yeah.
Oh my. Well, it's definitely biking is definitely lower impact than running, and these days the cartilage in my knees would prefer lower impact. I can tell you that. So,
I hear you.
oh, Greg, as we finish up, I got one more question for you, my friend. You know that one of my passions is leadership, and I've been lucky enough in my career to work for good leaders with good leaders and have an opportunity to study and practice some leadership characteristics. So maybe if you could share with our listeners, what's one leadership principle that you have adopted in your career, and how did you come to learn that particular characteristic?
Empathy, empathy, without a doubt. Understanding in as many circumstances as you can, the other point of view, the other side of you, and obviously this is good for life in general, but, it might surprise you to hear that early on in my career, I had a pretty strong ego. I kinda thought that everything that I did was right and my way was the right way and all of that, and I'd get frustrated if folks wouldn't do things the right way and all of that, and very visually, very in my face, I learned this lesson, and it was in late 1998. I know that because I just started a position at that, Middle Tennessee State, that the university I mentioned before,
Mhm.
and, we had a network monitoring system that was not doing a job monitoring the network, and my assistant there had been tasked for some time to um, make it work. And I knew nothing about it, but I knew basics of SNMP and ICMP and all that fun stuff. And so I'm asking him, and also there were some significant network challenges and all that, and he was just learning more about networking. And well, to make a long story short, I got pressure from above to get this thing working, like a couple weeks in, and I'm like, I'm just going to take this over myself. Probably the worst decision I've one of the worst decisions I'd made as a quote unquote leader. Because I'll tell you, Mark, I saw the look on his face when I said, I'll just do it. Oh my goodness. I mean, I could feel it in the pit of my stomach almost 30 years later now, 25, 27 years later, whatever it is. Um, what I just took away from him
Mm.
and what I just took away from our team, the team that I had just come in to build, um, my attitude flipped right there. So instead of me worrying about my needs, I learned in that moment to worry about their needs. So I flipped it back. I said, "Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit. What are some of the issues you're finding?" And for first, I apologized. I was like, that wasn't the right thing for me to do. And what ended up potentially being a very bad situation resulted in a good mentoring situation. And together, him and I, we got it working, and that was the beginning of forging a more than 12-year partnership that him and I ran the network together. So yeah, understand people are people, and they have feelings too. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for sharing that. And I think it goes back to the point we made earlier about, our life experiences shape us. Obviously, that one was very impactful for you in the moment. You had a realization, based on your team members' reaction that influenced and shaped how you led going forward. And I think for all of us, we've all worked with, for, and around leaders that were, probably good, and some, maybe not so good, and hopefully not many had to work for really, really bad leaders, but yeah, we may have seen them. And so I think, watching those things, emulating the characteristics that the best leaders bring to the table, and then trying to hold ourselves accountable when we make mistakes is really important as leaders.
Absolutely, and you can actually learn from bad leaders too. Not only can you learn to leave a job real fast, but you can learn about like what not to do
Yes.
at times. But yeah, I empathy is so important. Empathy and ethics. Yeah, but we won't go down the other
Yeah.
path.
Great, man. Thank you very much for joining us today. What a pleasure it has been to have you on our podcast. Thank you for blessing our readers with your wisdom and insight. And we are going to put a link to the virtual CISO moment in the show notes. So if you've enjoyed this podcast, I would encourage you to tune in and listen to Greg and his guests. I know you'll find them engaging and interesting, and you'll continue to learn more insights from Greg. So, Greg, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark. It was a lot of fun catching up again. It always is.
Yes, yes. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and stay secure.